For you pro wrestling fans out there, I'm sure you all remember Ultimate Warrior and his veins just busting out of those arms. I mean, it really gave that physique impact, pop, and wow. One of the most vascular wrestlers I've ever seen. Of course, he had some assistants. He had some ropes tied around those arms. Probably not the most healthy, safe thing to do, but anyway. Today we are going to go through the history of not pro wrestling, but bodybuilding, and we are going to look at some examples of some of the most vascular or veiny bodybuilders of all time. I remember thumbing through an old Nautilus book when I was just knee-high to a grasshopper, just a little kid. And one of the first things that I noticed was how veiny some of these guys were. Sergio Oliva, not really known for it, but take a close look, and he had veins all over the place. On the contrary, a guy like Arnold Schwarzenegger, a little bit smoother in that aspect. He had one great big cord vein, probably named it. That's all he needed. He didn't need a whole bunch. He just needed that one big cord vein. But anyway, those are some of the most famous bodybuilders. We're going to look at some guys that are maybe not quite so known in this video, but for the most part, I'm sure you guys will have heard of 90% of these guys. This is Don Ross, and I mean, this guy was maybe one of the first examples of a very vascular bodybuilder. And it was before a whole lot of supplements. I mean, this guy competed back in the 60s, for goodness sakes. So it leads me to lend some credibility that it is a genetic thing, much like a lot of these aspects of bodybuilding. Whether you're huge, lean, aesthetic, or vascular, it is definitely a genetic trait, in my opinion. Don Ross, one of the forerunners for that. And so was Johnny Fuller. And it took a real close picture of some of these guys, because the on-stage footage, not the best. You can't really see it. But I mean, Johnny Fuller, he had veins in his head, for goodness sakes. And his forearms just loaded. In some cases, it really took a side-by-side comparison to realize how vascular, or in Frank Zane's case, how not that vascular he really was. I mean, I'm sure he was first in a lot of your guys' minds, but a guy like Mike Mentzer was actually quite more vascular. And like I said, a couple of close-up shots of some of these guys, and you can see every inch of this guy just coated. And Mike Mentzer, one of the first guys that had cord veins just running, pulsating through those legs. I mean, that is quite impressive. As we entered the 1980s, one name sticks out in my mind. This guy here, Jusup Wilkosz. He was probably the most vascular guy of the early 1980s. And I mean, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Every single one of these guys was covered in veins. Lee Haney, even not known at all for being a very vascular bodybuilder. But you watch some interviews, the camera up close, and I mean, you can really see the vascularity coming out of this guy's chest. But one guy around that era, mid-80s, late 80s, absolutely would hold the crown of most veins. Is this guy here, Rich Gaspari. Needs no introduction to any bodybuilding buffs at all. Placed runner-up to Lee Haney several times. I mean, this guy, he could easily be the most vascular bodybuilder of all time. Taking into consideration the decade that he did compete, I mean, they weren't on that much stuff. I mean, it was probably a whole lot, but compared to later years, which we will see, and that would be the Mass Monster era, and it was the 1990s. Every one of these guys, whether it be Sean Ray or Dorian Yates, had a certain level of vascularity, which I'm sure would overshadow even your Rich Gasparis, your things of that nature. But not one of them really stood out as being the most vascular, except for one man, Paul Dillett. Yes, I get it. Paul Dillett was easily the most vascular bodybuilder of the 1990s, and I wager to say the 90s was maybe the most vascular era. Now, in Paul's case, he has what I like to call pipes, hose veins, cords, things of that nature. I'm sure you guys have a different name for them. Perhaps varicose. Not sure. But it reminds me of Dave Bautista. You guys remember Batista? They called him the Deacon Batista. He was huge back in the day, and look at those cord veins. The old wrestler from the 80s, too. The Rock, Don Morocco. Same thing. Harder to find pictures of that guy. Wrestlers, they were full of veins, too. But none of them even come close to Paul Dillett. I mean, I have never seen a display of vascularity veins like Paul Dillett. Another guy from the 90s, not nearly as bad or as good, if you like it or don't like it, as Paul Dillett. Lee Priest, definitely worth to mention though. A couple of pictures in particular backstage, he really looked vascular. So Lee Priest worth to mention, and you cannot throw Lee Priest in without mentioning his buddy, Dave Palumbo. Obviously, you guys all know Dave from his YouTube channel. Awesome set of veins on this guy. Hoses, pipes, and not an Olympian by any means, or even a pro, but of course it was harder to get your pro card back then, Dave's day. I'm sure nowadays he'd have his. But the most veins, absolutely, of maybe a non-pro. During the mid-2000s to the late 2000s, or early to mid, I should say, it was the Ronnie Colemans and Jay Cutlers were around. Not the most vascular bunch, worth to mention, though. Ronnie came back in, I think it was 2006, the year he lost, and I've never seen him look that veiny. Just incredible. So yeah, not many guys, but one did emerge as being just covered head to toe. And it was Branch Warren, the Texas Rattlesnake? Or is that Stone Cold? Well, they could have the same nickname. Yeah, I mean, Branch Warren, look at that chest. There is not, and I'm sure you could look a microscope or look in closer, and there's not a centimeter that doesn't have vein over top of vein. I mean, it's almost eerie to look at. But I mean, you picture yourself being a pro bodybuilder. What's a couple of extra veins? I mean, you're only going to make the other guy look soft. And it's not to say that the most vascular guy is the most conditioned. But let's face it, if you are genetically superior in that aspect, then I believe the more conditioned you are, then yeah, the more veins are going to show up. But being super carbed up, I think that would have a lot to do with it as well. But aside from Branch, I mean, you look at the rosters, and not a whole lot of vascular bodybuilders. They were very conditioned, nonetheless, but not a whole lot of noodle veins like your Paul Dilletts. There was a couple of guys here and there that would pop up. This is Essa Obiad. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Not that famous, but probably more known for those veins. And a rare glimpse of a vascular back. I did, in fact, look at a lot of these guys and their back developments, and not a whole lot of bodybuilders, aside from Rolly, the Beast Winkler, had a big old veiny back. One guy did, though. A current competitor. You guys know who this is? This is Charles Griffin, and if you've ever seen Charles Griffin's back lat spread, coated, and I mean coated, in vascularity. But like I said, it's the odd guy here and there. Not too many of the current competitors. Even your Nick Walker, as vascular as he is, I mean, not really known for, if you stack him up against your Paul Dilletts, things of that nature, he is definitely known for a very vascular set of calves. But I don't want to get you guys going in the comments section. You guys can be very hurtful as far as that's concerned. But anyway. Yeah, you look at the top three, and there's certain ways you can see these guys, like a picture like this, doctored up a little bit. And in all three cases, Samson Dowda, Hattie Shupin, and even Derek Lunsford, they look pretty vascular. But in the grand scheme of things, not one of them really an overvascular bodybuilder. However, at least one gentleman in the current roster does resemble that remark, at least in the lag development. This is Rubiel Mosquera, otherwise known as Neckzilla. You can call him Quadzilla if you want. I mean, these quads are coated in veins. Big, thick cord vascularity. So a fitting way to end this one. One of the newest IFBB pros, one of the most exciting IFBB pros in Rubiel Mosquera, and definitely deserved of a mention based on those legs alone. So in conclusion, I would wager to say that between Paul Dillett and Branch Warren, there is no bodybuilders on the face of the earth. And given that the 90s, and I guess with Branch the 2000s, the most vascular, but I would say as an average, the 90s, most vascular, I wager to say that we will never ever see any bodybuilder as veiny as these two. I mean, it's genetics plus, mostly genetics for Paul, apparently. They say he didn't train hard. He must have trained pretty hard to get those muscles pumping. Anyway, really hope you enjoyed this one. It has been requested many, many times. So here it is.
Oh, come on! Subscribe to my channel, please, if you have not already. And if you would like to, check out my latest video as well. You will also find a playlist if you are in the mood. Hey, Billy, find me a way to this hole.